The freezing wind off Lake Michigan cut through the concrete canyons of downtown Chicago like a serrated hunting knife, carrying with it a blinding swirl of crystalline snow that buried the city under a suffocating blanket of absolute white. But Harrison Croft did not feel the cold because he was standing inside the heated glass vestibule of the Croft Pinnacle, his newly constructed billion-dollar luxury residential high-rise, wearing a bespoke vicuna wool overcoat that cost more than the average American earned in a decade and holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. Croft, a 42-year-old real estate developer with perfectly slicked silver hair and eyes as flat and cold as newly minted coins, stared through the reinforced floor-to-ceiling glass at the huddled mass of human misery shivering on the public sidewalk just beyond his property line. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne, letting the expensive bubbles burst against his palate before he turned to his head of private security, a massive man named Griggs, who was standing at attention with his hands clasped behind his back. "Clear the trash off my sidewalk," Griggs Croft ordered, his voice a smooth, arrogant drawl that carried absolutely no human empathy. "I have 300 of the wealthiest investors in the world arriving for the grand opening gala in exactly 2 hours, and I will not have them stepping over human debris to enter my building. Use the hoses if you have to just get them out of my sight." Griggs nodded sharply and stepped out into the howling blizzard, his heavy combat boots crunching violently into the snow, barking orders at a team of 6 heavily armed security contractors who immediately began kicking at the makeshift cardboard shelters and dragging freezing men and women by their collars, throwing their meager belongings into the gutter. Maya Caldwell, a 28-year-old woman wearing 3 layers of threadbare sweaters and a torn, oversized parka, sat silently against the frozen granite retaining wall, holding her knees to her chest, her dark eyes watching the violent spectacle with a quiet, terrifying intensity. Maya did not scream, she did not beg, she did not scramble to gather the few empty cans she had collected that day. She simply reached into her worn canvas duffel bag and pulled out a heavy military-grade thermal blanket, the only truly valuable possession she owned, the only thing standing between her and severe hypothermia, on a night when the temperature was plummeting to 20 degrees below zero. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, her fingers stiff and numb, watching as Croft stood in the glowing warmth of his glass palace, smiling a cruel, satisfied smile as he watched the vulnerable scatter into the deadly winter night. Griggs approached Maya, raising his baton, striking the granite wall inches from her head, sending a shower of stone dust into the freezing air. "Move along, garbage," he growled, his breath pluming in the cold. Maya did not flinch. She did not look at the baton. She slowly raised her eyes to look directly through the glass vestibule, locking her gaze with Harrison Croft. For 5 agonizing seconds, she held the billionaire's stare, her expression a mask of absolute stoic endurance, communicating a silent, devastating promise that she would outlast his cruelty, before she slowly stood up, pulled her duffel bag over her shoulder, and walked away into the blinding white storm, not knowing that in less than 12 hours she would hold Croft's entire empire in the palm of her frozen hands. Man, I have to pause right here because my blood is literally boiling watching this level of casual aristocratic evil play out. You have a billionaire standing in a heated glass box, drinking champagne, while he orders his goons to violently throw freezing people into a deadly blizzard, just so his wealthy friends do not have to look at the consequences of the housing crisis he helped create. Croft looks at Maya and sees nothing but an insect to be crushed beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. He sees a completely powerless victim who exists only to be swept away so he can maintain his perfect, pristine illusion of luxury. But what Croft does not know, what nobody in that glittering high-rise knows, is that Maya Caldwell is not a victim. She is a dormant volcano of pure, hyper-competent brilliance, and the man she's about to find shivering in the dark alleyway behind Croft's building is not just another homeless casualty of the storm. He is the ultimate catalyst, and Croft has just handed them the match to burn his entire kingdom to the ground. Let us get deep into this. To truly understand the absolute catastrophic magnitude of the mistake Harrison Croft just made, you have to understand exactly who he just kicked out into the snow and how she ended up on the frozen concrete. Maya Caldwell was not born onto the streets. She was born in a quiet working-class neighborhood on the South Side to parents who worked grueling double shifts to ensure she had the opportunities they never did. She was a prodigy, a brilliant architectural engineering student at a prestigious local university who spent her nights building intricate structural models and her days interning at the city's largest urban planning firm. She possessed an eidetic memory for blueprints, zoning laws, and structural load capacities, a mind capable of seeing a city not just as a collection of buildings, but as a living, breathing mathematical organism. She was 6 months away from graduating at the top of her class with a full-time partnership offer waiting for her when the absolute worst kind of tragedy struck. Her parents were involved in a catastrophic multi-car collision on the interstate caused by a distracted commercial truck driver. Her father died instantly, and her mother was left on highly specialized life support, completely paralyzed and requiring constant round-the-clock neurological care that was not covered by their basic insurance policy. Maya did not hesitate. She did not complain. She did not ask for pity. She simply withdrew from her university, emptied her entire savings account, and took on 3 minimum wage jobs to keep her mother alive. For 2 years, she fought a losing battle against the crushing weight of the American medical debt machine, watching the hospital bills pile up into the millions until the bank finally foreclosed on their family home. When her mother ultimately succumbed to her injuries, passing away quietly in the middle of a Tuesday night, Maya was left with nothing: no home, no degree, no money, and an ocean of debt that predatory collection agencies aggressively pursued. She was evicted, forced out onto the streets with nothing but her canvas duffel bag and her father's military-issue thermal blanket. But the streets did not break. Maya Caldwell, they sharpened her into something formidable, something resilient and relentlessly observant. She navigated the perilous, brutal ecosystem of the homeless encampments with a stoic, silent competence, fixing broken tents, engineering makeshift heating systems from discarded industrial vents, and mapping out the safest zones in the city, using her architectural knowledge to identify structural overhangs that provided the best shelter from the biting winds. She became a silent guardian in the shadows, watching the city change, watching men like Harrison Croft buy up affordable housing tracts, bulldoze them into dust, and erect massive, glittering monuments to their own greed. Harrison Croft was the exact opposite of Maya. He was a man born on third base who spent his entire life demanding people congratulate him for hitting a triple. He inherited a modest regional real estate firm from his father and aggressively transformed it into a ruthless corporate behemoth through hostile takeovers, predatory lending practices, and a systematic campaign of bribing city zoning officials to look the other way while he demolished low-income neighborhoods. Croft despised the homeless. He viewed them as an aesthetic blight on his pristine urban canvas, a personal insult to his vision of a sterile, wealthy metropolis. He was the primary lobbyist responsible for the city's hostile architecture initiative, spending millions of dollars to install brutal iron spikes on public benches, sloped metal grates over warm subway vents, and high-frequency sound emitters in underpasses, specifically designed to torture anyone trying to sleep. He took a dark, sadistic pleasure in his power, standing in his penthouse suites, looking down at the streets, imagining himself as a god, sweeping away the unworthy. His crowning achievement was the Croft Pinnacle, a towering needle of glass and steel that he built directly on top of a demolished community center, relying heavily on an opaque, massive influx of capital from an anonymous private equity conglomerate, known only as the Vanguard Trust. Croft had leveraged every single asset he owned to secure the Vanguard funding, placing his entire empire on a precarious knife edge of debt, assuming the massive pre-sales of the Pinnacle luxury condos would cover the margins. The grand opening gala was not just a celebration, it was a desperate, essential maneuver to secure further investment and project an image of absolute financial invulnerability. He needed the sidewalk completely cleared, he needed the illusion to be absolutely flawless, and he did not care how many people froze to death in the shadows as long as the champagne kept flowing in the light. The escalation began 3 days before the blizzard hit when the City Meteorological Service issued a dire code, red weather emergency warning, of historic deadly temperatures and blinding snow accumulation. Rather than opening his empty commercial lobbies as emergency warming centers, like several other corporate entities had elected to do, Croft actively doubled his security patrols, arming them with high-powered flashlights and industrial leaf blowers, instructing them to relentlessly harass anyone attempting to seek shelter near his properties. Maya had spent those 3 days quietly moving the most vulnerable members of her encampment, an elderly woman with advanced arthritis and a teenage runaway with a hacking cough, to a subterranean steam tunnel she had identified months prior, using her knowledge of the city's foundational blueprints. She had ensured they were safe, she had secured their perimeter, and she had emerged back onto the surface level to scavenge for extra supplies when the blizzard finally struck with terrifying apocalyptic force. The wind chill dropped to 30 below zero, the snow falling so thick and fast it erased the streetlights, plunging the city into a disorienting, freezing whiteout. Maya had been attempting to cross the main plaza, seeking the temporary shelter of the vestibule, when Croft and Griggs had violently initiated their purge. As Maya walked away from the glittering glass of the Pinnacle, the cold immediately began its aggressive assault on her body, biting through her frayed sweaters, freezing the moisture in her breath. To her eyelashes, her joints aching with a deep, agonizing throb. She navigated the treacherous, ice-slicked pavement, moving deliberately, avoiding the main thoroughfares where the wind whipped with hurricane force, choosing a narrow, claustrophobic service alley that ran directly behind the rear loading docks of the Croft Pinnacle. The alley was a dark, freezing wind tunnel, littered with frozen dumpsters and discarded construction debris, the ground covered in a treacherous layer of black ice. Maya moved slowly, her head down, fighting the physiological panic of hypothermia, focusing her brilliant mind on the mechanics of survival, calculating the exact core temperature drop, running the numbers on how long she had, before her organs began to systematically shut down. She reached a recessed concrete alcove near the massive steel exhaust vents of the building's industrial HVAC system, hoping to catch a stray draft of residual heat, but the vents were dead. Croft had deliberately ordered them shut off to prevent anyone from loitering. As Maya sank down against the freezing concrete, preparing to wrap herself completely in her heavy thermal blanket to ride out the deadly night, she heard a sound that made her freeze. It was a faint, shallow, rattling gasp followed by a wet, violently violent shiver. She turned her head, squinting through the blowing snow into the darkest corner of the alcove. Huddled against the icy brickwork, partially buried under a growing drift of snow, was an old man. He was wearing a thin, ruined tweed suit entirely inappropriate for the weather, his hands bare and purple, his skin a terrifying ashen gray, his lips cracked and bleeding. He was violently shaking his body, losing the battle against the extreme cold, locked in the terrifying final stages of severe hypothermia, where the shivering begins to slow down, a biological precursor to imminent death. Maya stared at him, her brilliant calculating mind instantly assessing the situation, running the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of survival. She only had one thermal blanket. It was designed to reflect and retain the body heat of a single individual. If she shared it, the thermodynamic efficiency would drop catastrophically, exposing them both to a much higher risk of freezing. If she gave it to him entirely, she would almost certainly die before dawn. The logical, self-preserving choice, The choice every instinct in her freezing body was screaming at her to make was to wrap the blanket around herself and ignore the dying man in the dark. But Maya Caldwell was not Harrison Croft. She did not measure human life on a balance sheet. She did not calculate worth based on aesthetic value or financial leverage. She saw a human being taking what might be his final ragged breaths alone in the dark, and she made her choice with a quiet, absolute stoic certainty. She unzipped her duffel bag, pulled out the heavy military-grade thermal blanket, and crawled across the freezing concrete toward the old man. She did not speak. She did not offer empty words of comfort. She simply unfolded the mass of heavy fabric and wrapped it tightly around his shivering, frail shoulders, tucking the edges securely under his legs to block the biting wind. The old man gasped, his eyes fluttering open, glazed and unfocused, staring at her with profound confusion as the sudden, heavy warmth of the blanket hit his freezing skin. Why, he croaked, his voice barely a whisper, lost in the howling wind. "Keep your breathing slow," Maya commanded, her voice sparse, factual, and completely devoid of panic. "The material will reflect your radiant heat. You need to tuck your hands under your armpits to protect your extremities from frostbite. Do not go to sleep." She sat down directly beside him, positioning her own freezing body as a physical windbreak between him and the howling alleyway, exposing her back to the full, brutal force of the blizzard. The cold immediately hit her like a physical blow, sinking its teeth into her spine, draining the warmth from her core, setting off a cascade of agonizing neurological alarm bells. She closed her eyes, slowing her heart rate, relying on pure, unbreakable willpower to endure the agony. 30 minutes later, the heavy steel security door of the loading dock crashed open, spilling a harsh slice of yellow light into the dark, freezing alley. Harrison Croft stepped out wearing his vicuna overcoat, holding a freshly lit imported cigar, a cloud of rich, aromatic smoke billowing from his mouth. He had stepped outside to take a private phone call, away from the noise of the gala, needing to assure his frantic creditors that the Vanguard Trust executives were impressed with the opening. He turned pacing into the alley and stopped dead, his expensive shoes crunching on the snow as his eyes adjusted to the dark. He saw Maya sitting rigidly against the wall, her lips blue, her body violently trembling, and he saw the old man wrapped in the heavy thermal blanket beside her. Croft let out a loud, cruel bark of laughter, the sound echoing off the frozen bricks. "Well, well, well, if it isn't the stubborn piece of trash from my sidewalk," Croft sneered, walking closer, taking a long, arrogant drag from his cigar. "I specifically told my men to clear you out, and here you are, huddled in my alley like a rat refusing to take a hint." He looked at the old man shivering under the blanket and shook his head in mock pity. "And you brought a friend sharing a filthy rag in the dark while $1 billion of luxury sits 10 feet away. This is exactly why people like you stay exactly where you are. You have zero ambition, zero drive. You just drag each other down into the gutter." He reached out and casually poured the remaining half of his expensive champagne out onto the snow, inches from Maya's frozen boots. "I would tell you to move along," Croft whispered, his voice dripping with venomous cruelty, "but honestly, I think the cold is going to solve my garbage problem for me tonight. Enjoy the weather, trash." He turned on his heel, pulled the heavy steel door shut, and locked it from the inside, plunging the alley back into complete freezing darkness, leaving Maya and the old man to die in the snow. "Yo, I need to stop right here, because this is the exact moment where the universe takes a snapshot of who you really are." Croft is standing there, dripping in wealth, smoking a cigar, mocking a woman who is literally freezing to death because she chose to save another human being. He thinks he has won. He thinks his money makes him a god. He thinks he has established the natural order of life. But what that arrogant, heartless fool does not realize is that the universe has a highly specific, deeply ironic sense of humor. He just mocked the old man. Under the blanket, he called him trash. He poured a drink on his shoes. He has absolutely no idea who he just insulted, and he has absolutely no idea that his entire empire is about to be vaporized before he even finishes his morning coffee. Let's witness the destruction. The night dragged on, an agonizing blur of pain and slipping consciousness for Maya, her brilliant mind fighting through the fog of severe hypothermia, utilizing sheer mental discipline to keep her heart beating, to keep her eyes open to monitor the old man beside her. As the first gray light of dawn finally broke through the dense clouds, the blizzard abruptly died, leaving the city buried under 3 feet of silent, pristine snow. The temperature was still brutally cold, but the deadly wind had stopped. Maya sat frozen against the brick wall, her body completely numb, her eyelashes caked in thick ice, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Beside her, the old man stirred. He pushed the heavy thermal blanket down his hands, no longer shaking his skin, no longer gray. The blanket had done its job. It had saved his life at the direct expense of hers. The old man slowly sat up, wincing, as his stiff joints popped and looked at Maya. He looked at her blue lips, her frostbitten fingers, her stoic, unwavering face. He did not say a word. He simply reached out and gently placed his warm hand over her freezing one, a silent gesture of profound, unimaginable gratitude. At that exact moment, the screech of heavy tires broke the morning silence. A convoy of 5 massive black-armored SUVs equipped with snow chains and flashing hazard lights tore into the narrow alleyway, fishtailing on the ice before coming to a violent sliding halt directly in front of the loading dock. The doors flew open, and a dozen men in dark suits, panicked and shouting, poured out of the vehicles, frantically scanning the alley. "Over here," one of the men yelled, his voice cracking with sheer terror, pointing at the alcove. The men sprinted through the deep snow, dropping to their knees in front of the old man, their faces pale with panic. "Mr. Pendleton! Sir, thank God, we have been looking for you all night. The tracking chip in your phone went dark. We thought you were dead." A frantic man with an earpiece babbled, pulling off his own expensive cashmere coat and wrapping it aggressively around the old man. The old man, Arthur Pendleton, the eccentric, reclusive multi-billionaire founder and sole controlling director of the Vanguard Trust, the absolute financial leviathan holding the entire massive debt structure of Harrison Croft's empire, simply held up a single, silencing hand. The chaotic shouting instantly stopped. Pendleton stood up, his posture, straightening, his demeanor instantly shifting from a freezing, frail vagrant to a man who commanded absolute, terrifying global authority. I suffered a minor neurological episode and became disoriented, leaving the gala quietly. Pendleton stated, his voice no longer weak, but resonating with the cold, hard steel of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. I dropped my phone in a snowbank. If it were not for this remarkable young woman, I would have frozen to death in the shadow of the very building my money financed. Get her into the lead vehicle immediately, get the heat on maximum, and call my personal medical team to be waiting at the penthouse. 2 large security operatives immediately moved to lift Maya, gently wrapping her in heated blankets and carrying her toward the idling SUV. As they loaded her into the warm leather interior, the heavy steel door of the loading dock suddenly swung open. Harrison Croft stepped out, holding a cup of hot espresso, wearing a fresh tailored suit, looking immensely pleased with himself as he surveyed the morning after his successful gala. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the convoy of armored SUVs, his eyes wide with confusion. The lead security operative from the Vanguard team stepped forward, flashing a titanium badge. "Mr. Croft, what is going on here?" Croft demanded, trying to reassert his authority. "Why are you blocking my loading dock?" Arthur Pendleton slowly turned around, brushing the snow off his ruined tweed suit, his eyes locking onto Croft with a gaze so intensely furious it could have melted the ice on the pavement. Croft dropped his espresso, the ceramic cup shattering on the frozen ground, sending dark coffee spilling across the snow in the exact spot he had poured his champagne the night before. "What? Mr. Pendleton Croft," stammered, his face draining of all color, his mind desperately scrambling to process what he was seeing. "Sir, I did not know you were outside. We had the penthouse suite prepared for you. You told me my ambition was 0. Pendleton interrupted, his voice a quiet, devastating roar that echoed off the brick walls. "You told me I was trash. You poured your champagne on my boots while I was freezing to death and left me to die while you went inside to celebrate a building bought entirely with my money." Croft stepped back, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, his arrogant facade completely shattering, exposing the weak, terrified coward underneath. "Sir, I did not know it was you. It was dark. You were wrapped in a dirty blanket. I thought you were just a homeless vagrant." Croft pleaded, his voice a high-pitched whine of sheer desperation. Pendleton stepped forward, closing the distance, pointing a single, unwavering finger directly at Croft's chest. "That is exactly the point, you pathetic, arrogant fool," Pendleton snarled. "You thought I was someone beneath you? You thought I was someone who did not matter, and in doing so, you revealed the absolute rotting core of your character. You do not build a city, Croft, you exploit it, you parasitize it, and you destroy the people who built it." Pendleton turned to his frantic chief of staff, who was standing nearby, holding a secure satellite tablet. "Pull every single dollar of Vanguard funding out of the Croft portfolio immediately," Pendleton ordered, his voice echoing with absolute finality. Liquidate our holdings, call in all the leveraged margins, freeze his operational accounts, and contact the Federal Regulatory Commission. I want a full forensic audit of every single bribe and zoning violation this parasite has committed in the last decade. Sir, the margins are completely over-leveraged. If we pull the funding, now his entire company will instantly face catastrophic bankruptcy, the chief of staff warned, rapidly tapping on the tablet. Good Pendleton replied without a single ounce of mercy. Burn it to the ground! Croft fell to his knees in the snow, the freezing slush soaking through his expensive tailored suit, his hands trembling violently. No, please, Arthur, you cannot do this. This building is my life. My entire net worth is tied up in the pre-sales. If you pull the funding, I am finished. I will have nothing. Croft sobbed, his voice breaking, completely devoid of dignity. Pendleton looked down at the sobbing billionaire, his expression absolutely cold and unmoving. Then I suggest you find a very warm blanket, Mr. Croft, Pendleton whispered. Enjoy the weather. Pendleton turned his back on the ruined man, walked to the lead SUV, climbed inside, and slammed the heavy armored door, shutting out the sound of Croft's desperate, pathetic wailing. Inside the heated cabin, Maya Caldwell sat wrapped in thermal layers, an IV line already established by a highly trained paramedic, her dark eyes watching Croft sobbing in the snow. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply spoke her first words of the morning, her voice sparse, factual, and devastatingly precise. You didn't build a city, Mr. Croft, Maya whispered, her breath fogging the armored glass. You built a graveyard, and now you are going to sleep in it. The convoy of black SUVs pulled away, accelerating out of the alley, leaving Harrison Croft kneeling alone in the freezing slush, a broken, bankrupt man staring at the shattered pieces of his destroyed empire. I gotta take a breath, because that level of instantaneous, absolute destruction is just beautiful. Croft thought he was a god. He thought he could treat people like garbage because he had a fancy suit and a glass building. He pushed all his chips into the center of the table, betting on his own arrogance, and the universe just called his bluff and took every single thing he owned. He didn't just lose his money, he lost his identity, he lost his power, he lost his entire future in the span of 5 minutes. Real competence, real character, it doesn't need a loudspeaker, it just needs a moment of truth to reveal itself. And when Maya made the choice to save a life, she inadvertently armed the greatest weapon that city had ever seen. The fallout over the next 48 hours was a relentless, violent hurricane of financial and legal consequences. As the Vanguard Trust systematically pulled its massive capital anchors out of the Croft portfolio, the entire highly leveraged corporate structure collapsed like a fragile house of cards in a wind tunnel. Croft's operational accounts were frozen, his credit lines were instantly terminated, and the massive balloon payments on his predatory loans defaulted simultaneously. The Federal Regulatory Commission, acting on the explosive dossier of evidence deliberately handed over by Pendleton's massive army of corporate lawyers, raided the Croft corporate headquarters, seizing hard drives, freezing personal assets, and formally charging Harrison Croft with 27 counts of felony wire fraud, systemic bribery, and illegal eviction practices. The grand opening of the Croft Pinnacle was indefinitely canceled, the luxury investors fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, leaving the massive glass tower completely empty, a glittering monument to arrogance and catastrophic failure. Croft was stripped of his properties, his bespoke suits replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his future reduced to a cold concrete cell, where the heat rarely worked, a profoundly ironic justice for a man who had frozen the vulnerable for sport. While Croft's empire burned, Maya Caldwell woke up 3 days later in the massive sunlit master bedroom of a $30 million luxury penthouse overlooking the city, her severe frostbite fully treated by a team of elite private physicians, her medical needs completely managed. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the massive bed, wearing a freshly tailored suit, was Arthur Pendleton, looking healthy, sharp, and profoundly awake. Maya sat up the IV line removed from her arm, her brilliant calculating mind instantly assessing her pristine surroundings before locking her dark stoic eyes onto the billionaire. You are awake, Pendleton said, a genuine warm smile breaking across his stern face. I took the liberty of looking into your background, Miss Caldwell. An eidetic memory top of your architectural class, a tragic medical debt collapse. The city failed you, the system failed you, and Harrison Croft tried to erase you. But you refused to be erased. Pendleton leaned forward, resting his hands on his silver cane. I have established a $50 million irrevocable trust fund exclusively in your name, completely unencumbered, tax-free, and immune to any outstanding medical debt collections, which my lawyers have already systematically vaporized. You have the capital, you have the brilliance, and now you have the power. What are you going to do with it? Maya looked at the sprawling city skyline, visible through the massive glass windows, seeing the invisible structural lines, the zoning maps, the neglected neighborhoods, the freezing alleys. She did not look at the luxury of the room. She did not care about the money. As a tool for personal comfort, she saw the money for exactly what it was, an architectural foundation to build something undeniable. I am going to buy the pinnacle! Maya set her voice a low, quiet thunder. Pendleton raised an eyebrow, his smile widening into a grin of pure, predatory approval. Buy it, Pendleton asked. Why? Because it has reinforced subterranean heating, creates a massive centralized commercial kitchen, and enough square footage to house, rehabilitate, and medically treat every single displaced resident in this city, Maya answered, factually laying out the blueprint in her mind. I am not going to live in a glass tower, Mr. Pendleton. I am going to turn his monument to greed into a fortress for the forgotten. 6 months later, Maya Caldwell sat behind a massive reclaimed mahogany desk on the top floor of the newly christened Caldwell Hope Center, the most advanced, heavily funded, comprehensively supportive rehabilitation and housing facility in the country, occupying the entirety of what was once the Croft Pinnacle. The glass vestibule was open 24 hours a day, radiating warmth onto the surrounding sidewalks. The lower floors contained state-of-the-art medical clinics, the middle floors held transitional housing, and the upper floors operated as a massive vocational training center offering free education and job placement. Maya wore a simple dark tailored blazer, reviewing a stack of structural blueprints for her next acquisition, expanding the safety net across the entire urban grid. She had taken the worst of the city and engineered it into the best, running the massive operation with her signature stoic competence, her brilliant mind finally utilized to its absolute maximum potential. But resting squarely in the center of her massive clean desk, locked inside a custom-built protective glass display case, where she could see it every single day, sat a single rugged artifact. A faded, heavy military-grade thermal blanket. She kept it there, not as a trophy of her wealth, not as a symbol of her power, but as a permanent, relentless reminder of the freezing alleyway, the brutal wind, and the exact moment she chose to save a life when the rest of the world told her to walk away. Real talk, guys. This story right here is the absolute definition of vindication. We live in a world that constantly tries to tell you that your net worth dictates your human worth, that the clothes you wear or the bank account you have makes you better than the person standing next to you. Croft believed that lie with his whole chest, and it destroyed him. Maya knew the truth. Character is not built in a boardroom. Character is built in the freezing dark when nobody is watching, and you have to make a choice about who you really are. If you are out there right now feeling like you are freezing, feeling like the world is looking right through you, keep your head up, keep your brilliance sharp, and never ever let a cruel world strip away your humanity. Because the universe is watching, and your moment to flip the entire board is coming. If this story hit you right in the soul, if you believe that true justice always finds a way to balance the scales, smash that like button, share this with someone who is fighting their own invisible battle, and subscribe for more stories of undeniable triumph. Stay brilliant, stay resilient, and never forget that a single blanket can change the entire world.